The Wyoming sky was bruised with thunderclouds, the air so still it felt like the land itself was waiting for something to break. Inside the wooden round pen, dust rose in slow spirals as the big sorrel quarter horse pawed at the ground, muscles rippling beneath his copper-red coat. His name was Redemption, but no one had ever seen mercy in him, only defiance and rage. Around the fence stood 5 weather-worn men, hats low, faces tight with tension. Their eyes kept drifting to the one man they all followed, even when they hated to admit it, Clemens Rourke, the owner of the land, and a man known for betting high and burying the cost. "I'll put down $1,000, Clemens said, his voice coarse like gravel in a dry stream bed. "Anyone who stays on him longer than 8 seconds can take it." He folded his arms over his chest, the silver buckle on his belt catching a sliver of dying sunlight. His gaze was steady, even amused. No one moved. Not Joe, not Carl, not the others. Redemption had already sent 2 grown men to the clinic, one with a broken collarbone, the other unconscious and still spitting dirt 2 days later. Clemens wasn't testing their courage. He was exposing their limits. Then, from beyond the fence, came the sound of boots in the dirt. Slow. Deliberate. All eyes turned. A lone figure approached, a young woman in worn chaps, a dust-streaked white shirt, and a broad-brimmed hat that shadowed most of her face. As she stepped closer, the silence grew sharper. Someone whispered, "Lurleen." It was the first time anyone had spoken her name on that land in years. Lurleen Rourke, the girl who left after her father, Clemens' brother, was killed trying to ride that same horse. "I'll ride him," she said, voice calm but heavy, like it had crawled up from somewhere deep. Clemens didn't speak. He just stared, as if the past had walked back into his corral, wearing her father's eyes. "You lost your mind, girl?" he muttered. "That horse killed your daddy." "No," she said, eyes locked on Redemption. "That horse tried to tell you. You just wouldn't listen." She opened the gate and stepped inside the ring. Redemption turned toward her. No snort, no stomp, just a long, steady look. Something about her held him still. Not submission, recognition. And in that breathless pause, every man watching knew, this wasn't just about breaking a horse. It was about breaking silence that had ruled the Rourke family for far too long. The moment Lurleen stepped inside the round pen, the air seemed to shift. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the weight of something returning. Redemption stood still, eyes locked on her, ears tilted forward like he was trying to remember a voice he'd once heard in a dream. She didn't rush. Each step she took was slow, steady, calculated. The dust clung to her boots like the memory of the past clung to this place. On the other side of the fence, Clemens said nothing, but his jaw tightened as if every breath cost him something. For a split second, the old man saw his brother again. Nate, the only man who ever got close to taming Redemption, and the one who died trying. No one ever spoke about the exact details. There had been no witnesses. Only the image of Nate lying motionless in the dust, blood mixing with the hoofprints around his body. Clemens always claimed the horse lost control. Others whispered different things. But the truth had been buried, just like Nate, and no one dared dig it up. Until now. Lurleen stopped just inches from the horse, her hand extended but not touching. She whispered something. No one could hear what. Redemption twitched but didn't move away. The fence line was a gallery of disbelief. Men who'd seen that horse buck, kick, rear, and foam now watched him stand like a statue carved out of fire and muscle. Joe muttered, "It ain't natural." But Clemens didn't blink. His eyes were on Lurleen, not the horse. Something about the way she moved, the way she looked at Redemption, it was like she knew things they didn't. Things she shouldn't. When she swung into the saddle, Redemption jolted, his front legs lifting in a flash of fury. But Lurleen stayed on. Not with brute strength, with balance, trust, and something deeper. Something almost broken. She didn't yank the reins or scream. She moved with him, let him fight the air, let him scream his rage. And then, like a fire burning out, he stopped, breathing hard, covered in sweat. But he didn't throw her. He didn't try. Clemens felt something turn in his gut. It wasn't pride. It was fear. Not of the horse, but of what Lurleen knew. Because no one should have been able to ride that horse. Not unless. He turned away from the fence, heart thudding. Behind him, the men still stared, frozen. Redemption had bowed his head, and Lurleen was whispering again. Not to the horse. To someone who wasn't there. The round pen was still. The only sound was Redemption's breath, heavy, steady, almost human in its exhaustion. Lurleen dismounted slowly, one boot touching the ground, then the other, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile truce had just been made. She kept a hand on his neck, her fingers buried in his sweat-darkened coat, whispering something that no one else could hear. Clemens stood with his back turned, jaw clenched, hands shoved into his pockets, fighting something rising in his chest that he didn't know how to name. Joe was the first to break the silence. "How'd she do it?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. Carl stepped forward a few inches, still wide-eyed. "That horses never let anyone close. Not since Nate." His voice trailed off. No one finished that sentence. Lurleen looked over at them, her face unreadable beneath the brim of her hat. She wasn't looking for applause. She wasn't proud. There was something haunted in her eyes, like she hadn't won anything at all, just confirmed a truth she already feared. "I knew he'd remember," she said softly. "Not me. Him." Joe frowned. "What are you talking about?" She looked at the horse again. "My father. He wasn't thrown. Redemption didn't buck him off." Her words dropped like stones into a dry well. Someone spooked the horse. Someone made sure Nate wouldn't get up again. Clemens turned around then, slowly. His face was pale beneath the dust and sun. "That's a hell of an accusation," he said, his voice tight, brittle. "You saying someone killed your father?" Lurleen didn't answer right away. Her eyes didn't leave Redemption. "I'm saying the story we've all lived with doesn't add up. I've watched this horse for 10 minutes and he's told me more truth than anyone else on this ranch in 6 years." Redemption gave a low, almost mournful snort and pressed his head gently into her shoulder. It wasn't just obedience. It was grief. Shared. Remembered. Felt. Clemens took a slow step forward, but something in Lurleen's posture warned him not to come closer. "He was afraid," she said. "But not of the horse. Of someone else. He left something behind, I think. Something that matters. And this horse, he knows where to start looking." No one spoke. Dust settled in the ring like ash after a fire. Something had shifted, not just in Redemption, but in the people watching. The silence wasn't confusion anymore. It was fear of what might come next. Later that evening, the sun dipped low behind the barn, casting long shadows across the land Nate once worked. Lurleen walked through the field with Redemption trailing behind her, calm now, as if some of his anger had settled with the dust. Every inch of that property felt unfamiliar and painfully known all at once. 6 years was enough time for paint to chip, fences to sag, but not enough for ghosts to fade. Her boots crunched over the gravel path toward the old tack shed, the one her father always kept locked. She hadn't planned to return there. Not ever. But something in Redemption's eyes, the way he'd looked toward the shed before, it tugged at her memory. She reached the door. The lock was rusted but broken, not cut, not forced. Just old, neglected, like the truth it was guarding. She hesitated, fingers trembling slightly, then pushed the door open. The smell of aged leather, dust, and something fainter, something metallic, hit her like a wave. The light cut through the wooden slats and landed on a small, cracked trunk in the corner. She knelt beside it. The lock was intact, but the key was still in it. That wasn't like Nate. He never left things unsecured. Slowly, she turned it, the click echoing louder than it should have. Inside, old papers, a worn saddle blanket, and at the bottom, a small leather-bound journal. Her father's. She knew the handwriting instantly. She swallowed hard and flipped it open, eyes scanning pages of routine notes, until they changed. Dates circled. Names underlined. One entry read, "Clemens wants to push the new grazing line. It'll cross Harlon's boundary. Told him it's not right." He didn't like that. Her breath caught in her throat. Another page, "Redemption is tense lately. Like he knows something's coming." The last entry stopped her heart. "If anything happens to me, tell Lurleen to read this. She'll understand." Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned fast, but there was no one there. Just whined through the cracks. Or maybe not. Her fingers clenched around the journal as if it were her father's hand. Meanwhile, inside the ranch house, Clemens stared out the window with a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. He'd seen Lurleen go to the shed. He knew exactly what was in that trunk. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had that morning, not from time, but from truth catching up. Out in the field, Redemption raised his head and let out a low, mournful whinny. The sound rolled across the ranch like a warning, carried on wind that no longer felt friendly. The journal felt heavier in Lurleen's hands than any saddle she'd ever carried. She sat alone on the porch of the bunkhouse, Redemption grazing a few yards away, occasionally lifting his head as if standing guard. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "If anything happens to me." He knew. Somehow, he'd seen it coming. The pages weren't just ramblings, they were warnings, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to something darker than anyone on the ranch wanted to admit. And Clemens? He was at the center of it all. Inside the main house, Clemens paced the length of the living room like a caged bull. Joe had noticed it too, how his older brother had been muttering under his breath all evening, his drink untouched, his hands never still. "You knew she'd find it," Joe finally said. "You should have burned that damn book." Clemens turned to him, face pale beneath the porch light spilling through the window. "And then what? Have her dig anyway, make up stories? At least this way I can see it coming." Joe leaned on the doorframe, crossing his arms. "What if she's right, Clemens? What if Nate didn't fall?" "She's not right," Clemens snapped, too fast, too loud. He was soft. Thought he could gentle a wild horse and win some damn moral victory. He died because he underestimated the animal. That's the truth. But even as he spoke it, the words tasted wrong. Hollow. Redemption had never bucked anyone the way he did Nate. And now, he let Lurleen ride him like he'd been waiting for her. That night, Lurleen couldn't sleep. She spread the journal out on the old bunkhouse table and reread every marked page. There were mentions of arguments, grazing rights, money missing from ranch accounts, a night when Nate came home with a busted lip. And then, curiously, a name, Harlon. Scribbled in the margins, circled twice. Harlon Wilkes, a neighbor who hadn't set foot on the property in years. A man who'd once been Clemens' closest ally. Until something drove them apart. At dawn, Lurleen saddled Redemption. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. But Clemens saw from the window, her silhouette riding west through the thinning mist. Toward Harlon's property. Toward answers. Back at the house, Clemens sank into the armchair where Nate used to sit after long rides. The silence of the room was crushing. On the mantel, an old photograph of the three of them, young, proud, unaware, stared back at him like a judgment, and Clemens whispered to the empty room, "You shouldn't have come back, girl." The Wilkes ranch sat quiet and forgotten on the edge of the valley, its fences sagging, the paint on the barn peeling like old skin. Lurleen hadn't been there since she was a child, but the land still felt heavy, like it remembered everything that had gone wrong. Redemption slowed as they approached the porch. A rocking chair creaked softly even though no wind stirred. And then the door opened. Harlon Wilkes stood in the doorway, older, thinner, his face lined like cracked leather. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I figured you'd come eventually," he said. His voice was worn, but not weak. Lurleen dismounted without a word. Her boots hit the earth with purpose. "You were there," she said, "the night my father died. Weren't you?" Harlon didn't answer right away. He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come inside. This ain't a porch conversation." The living room smelled like dust and wood smoke. The furniture was old, untouched, like time had given up trying to move through it. Harlon poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on a table between them. "Your daddy was a good man," he started. "Better than Clemens ever gave him credit for." "He knew something was wrong on that ranch," Lurleen said. "He was writing it all down. He named you." Harlon looked down at his cup. "Yeah, he talked to me. The week before he died, he came here. Said Clemens was pushing the cattle line into my land. Asked if I'd noticed any missing stock." He sighed. "I had. But I didn't say nothin'. I didn't want trouble." Lurleen's voice tightened. "So you let him walk back into it? Alone?" Harlon looked up then, eyes red, but dry. "I told him not to go near that horse that morning. Told him Clemens wasn't right in the head. That he was covering something. Nate said he'd handle it quiet. But he never got the chance. And I never had the guts to speak." Outside, Redemption pawed at the dirt, as if sensing the shift in air. Lurleen stared hard at Harlon. "He trusted you." "I know," Harlon said, his voice cracking. "And I failed him." He slid a folded envelope across the table. "He gave me this the day before. Told me to keep it safe, give it to you. If anything happened." Lurleen opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. And the first line changed everything. "If you're reading this, then Clemens made his move." Lurleen stared at the page, her breath shallow. Her father's handwriting was steady, like always, firm, deliberate. But the words carried weight that went far beyond ink. "If you're reading this, then Clemens made his move. I don't know how far he'll go, but I've seen enough to fear he'll go further than I ever imagined. I tried to reason with him. I warned him. But greed is louder than blood." The words punched through her like cold steel. In the letter, Nate laid out everything. The falsified cattle records, the landline Clemens had redrawn behind closed doors, and the accusations he was preparing to bring to court. But the part that made her blood freeze was near the bottom. "I think he'll use the horse. Redemption won't resist me, but if he's startled, spooked, it could look like an accident. Clemens knows that." Lurleen folded the letter slowly, her fingers trembling. She looked up at Harlon, who hadn't moved, his face pale, sick with guilt. "He planned it," she said quietly. "He knew redemption wouldn't hurt you unless someone made him." "I tried to believe it was just a tragic fall," Harlon said. "But deep down I knew. We all did. Clemens wanted your father silenced, and the horse gave him the perfect cover." Back at the Rourke ranch, Clemens stood on the back porch, watching the tree line. Redemption was gone. So was Lurleen. And the silence in her absence rang louder than any accusation. Joe came out behind him. "You think she knows?" he asked. Clemens didn't answer right away. "She has the eyes of her father," he muttered, "always looking for what's hidden." He turned and walked inside, his boots echoing against the floorboards. His next steps would matter. If she had that letter, Then it was only a matter of time before the entire valley knew. At Harlon's place, Lurleen saddled Redemption again, the letter tucked safely in her coat. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The horse stood completely still, as if sensing the storm they were riding toward. Before she mounted, Harlon stepped forward. "You can still leave this be," he said. "Start over somewhere else." Lurleen looked back at him. "And let Clemens keep my father's name buried in lies?" She mounted with practiced ease. "No. I came back to face this. I'm not riding away." She turned Redemption toward the horizon, the wind at her back. The sun was low again, and so was Clemens' time. The sun hung low over the Rourke ranch, bleeding orange and red across the sky like an open wound. As Lurleen rode Redemption back down the dirt road, the same one her father had taken that final morning, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and dry grass. But under it, something else stirred, tension, raw and electric. She kept one hand near the letter in her coat pocket, the words etched into her mind like scripture. "Greed is louder than blood." Her pulse beat in her ears. She wasn't afraid. She was done being afraid. Clemens saw her coming from the window. He didn't move. Just watched as she rode through the front gate like she belonged there, and maybe she always had. Joe stepped into the room behind him. "You gonna talk to her?" Clemens didn't answer. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and stared into the glass like it might show him a way out. "You think she'd listen?" Joe hesitated. "She's not her father. But she's not a fool either." Clemens downed the drink and set the glass down hard. "Then she's more dangerous than I thought." Lurleen dismounted and tied Redemption near the porch. The old boards creaked beneath her boots as she climbed the steps, slower than she wanted, not from fear, but control. Inside, Clemens waited in the same chair her father used to sit in. The fire was lit, though the evening was warm. It cast flickering shadows across his face, softening nothing. He looked up as she entered. "You went to Harlon," he said. Not a question. A statement. She nodded. "I did." "You read the letter?" "I did." A long silence stretched between them, full of things neither wanted to say first. Lurleen broke it. "You knew Redemption wouldn't hurt him unless he was scared. You set it up to look like an accident. Then you buried it and wore your guilt like a badge." Clemens' eyes didn't flinch, but his hands twitched on the armrest. "I built this ranch," he said. "Your father wanted to tear it apart with his righteousness. He gave me no choice." "No," she said. "You made the choice. And now you'll live with it exposed." He stood, slow but stiff, like a man much older than he'd admit. "What are you gonna do, girl? Drag my name through the mud? Burn down the only thing left of your family?" Lurleen stepped closer, eyes steady. "You already did that. I'm just lighting the truth." Outside, Redemption lifted his head and let out a piercing cry. A sound not of warning, but of ending. The sheriff's office in town had never felt like a place of justice, more like a storage closet for inconvenient truths. But as Lurleen pushed open the heavy wooden door the next morning, the letter from her father tucked into a manila folder under her arm, it suddenly felt different. The weight wasn't on the walls. It was in her hands. The truth, in her father's handwriting, was about to breathe for the first time in years. Redemption waited outside the building, still and silent. He hadn't bucked or bolted once since that ride, as if he knew the fight was no longer his to carry. Sheriff Mathers was older now, slower, but his eyes were still sharp beneath the brim of his tan hat. He read through the letter twice. When he finally looked up, there was a deep sadness in his expression. This should have come to me years ago," he muttered. Lurleen nodded. "My father trusted the wrong man. I'm trusting you now." Mathers closed the folder carefully. "You're sure about this?" It won't be quiet. Clemens has power. Lurleen's voice was calm. So did Nate. Until Clemens took it from him. Back at the ranch, Clemens stood alone in the barn, watching the dust float in sunbeams through the slats. He knew what was coming. He'd seen it in Lurleen's eyes. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, the kind that doesn't shout, just shows up and doesn't leave. Joe found him there, silent, holding a faded photo of the three brothers from decades ago. "They're coming for you," Joe said softly. "I know," Clemens replied. "I've been waiting for it longer than I'd like to admit." He didn't run. When the sheriff arrived with 2 deputies, Clemens stepped forward without a word. No argument. No anger. Just a resignation that looked too much like relief. As they cuffed him, he looked out toward the field, Redemption standing still in the same place where Nate had fallen. And on the porch, Lurleen watched it unfold without tears, without triumph. Just clarity. This wasn't closure. This was truth, raw and scarred. Later, as the truck disappeared down the road, Lurleen sat by the paddock, Redemption resting his head gently on her shoulder. She whispered to him, not with pain this time, but with peace. "He didn't win," she said. "Not in the end." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. The first in weeks. Not heavy, just enough to settle the dust and water the ground where roots had long been waiting to grow again. Weeks passed. The buzz around Clemens' arrest echoed through the valley like a long-delayed thunderclap. Neighbors who once admired him now spoke in hushed tones. Some were angry, others just stunned. But no one could ignore what had surfaced. Land boundaries were redrawn legally. Financial records were investigated. And with each truth exposed, the myth of Clemens Rourke unraveled thread by thread, until all that remained was a man who chose silence over justice and paid the price. Lurleen stayed. She could have left. The thought had crossed her mind more than once. But the land wasn't just dirt and fence lines. It was the place her father loved. The place he died defending. Every sunrise brought a little more clarity. She repaired the fence near the south line herself. Cleaned out the old tack shed. Turned her father's journal into something permanent. Pages scanned and saved, copies given to the sheriff, the lawyer, and the county recorder's office. But the original stayed with her. One morning, as mist still clung to the field, Redemption trotted beside her without a halter. He'd changed too. No more fire in his eyes, but not broken, just steady, loyal, as if he understood that something sacred had been set right. Lurleen paused near the oak tree at the edge of the pasture, the one Nate used to sit under at the end of long days. She knelt there and placed a small wooden box in the ground. Inside, the journal, the letter, a photograph of the 3 Rourke brothers, and a brass nameplate from Nate's old saddle. "I'm not burying you," she whispered. "I'm planting you." Joe watched from a distance, hat in hand. He didn't say much these days, but his presence was steady. Maybe he carried guilt too. Or maybe he just needed to believe that one piece of the Rourke legacy could still be saved. He walked up beside her, eyes on the wooden marker she'd carved herself. "You did what no one else would," he said. Lurleen looked at the horizon, golden with morning. "He was my father, and he deserved better than silence." As the wind stirred the tall grass, Redemption raised his head and let out a single, low call, not of pain or protest, but something gentler, something like peace. For the first time in years, the land felt still in a good way. And beneath that quiet sky, surrounded by truth and memory, Lurleen Rourke stood tall, not as a girl who returned to the past, but as the woman who rewrote it.